Let me ask you something that might sound weird. When was the last time you thought about your ears affecting how fast you walk? Well, probably never. Most people think of hearing loss as a communication problem. You miss a word. You ask people to repeat themselves once in a while. Or you're starting to turn the TV up a few clicks. Well, that's annoying, but that's not something that changes how you move through the world. But what if that picture is too small? What if untreated hearing loss is also part of the reason someone starts holding the rail a little tighter when they're on the stairs, or takes longer to cross a parking lot than they used to, or their spouse mentions, "You seem more cautious lately," and no one connected that to their hearing? A study published in 2026 involving more than 57,000 people found something that should make all of us pay attention. People with worse hearing walked measurably slower in their everyday lives, not in the lab, in the real world. I'm Dr. Len Garrett, founder of Timpanogos Hearing and Tinnitus here in Utah. I've been treating hearing loss for over 20 years. Today, I want to walk you through what this research actually found, why it makes complete physiological sense, and what it means if you have hearing loss, or if you've been telling yourself that the hearing loss isn't bad enough to do anything about it yet. Because this isn't just about hearing, it never was. Let's start with the research because the scale of this study matters. The Apple Hearing Study is a collaboration between the University of Michigan and Apple that's been running since 2019, with over 160,000 participants across the United States, one of the largest hearing research studies ever conducted. In April 2026, they published a new analysis specifically looking at the connection between hearing and physical mobility. Researchers examined walking speed data from 57,000 participants passively recorded by their iPhone sensors during their everyday lives, going to the store, walking the dog, just everyday things. They compared that data to each person's hearing test. The finding was consistent. The worse someone's hearing was, the slower they walked. This held up even after controlling for age and gender. The effect was particularly pronounced in adults 60 and older. Now, this is a correlation study. It doesn't prove hearing loss directly causes slower walking, and I'll say that clearly. Slower walking has many causes, though. Medication, vision changes, muscle strength, maybe some neuropathy. Hearing isn't the only factor, but it is one of the most overlooked ones, and this study adds to a growing body of evidence that it belongs in the conversation far more than it currently is. And there was a second finding worth noting. Among nearly 85,000 participants who tested within the normal hearing, which means 25 decibels or better, 16% still rated their hearing as fair or poor in daily life. More than 7% reported difficulty concentrating during conversations or following speech and background noise. A normal hearing test doesn't mean you're fine. That gap between clinical measurements and lived experience is real. Before we go deeper, if you've always thought about hearing loss was only missing words, please subscribe to the channel. This channel exists to show you how hearing affects your brain, your balance, your energy, and your independence, and what you can actually do about it. So why would hearing loss affect how fast you walk? This is where things get interesting. Your ears are not an isolated system. They're giving information to the same brain that manages your balance, your spatial awareness, and your confidence while navigating through everyday environments. When that auditory input degrades, the effects ripple outwards in ways most people never anticipate. Here's what's actually going on. Your brain has a finite amount of processing capacity at any given moment. Think of it as your cognitive budget. Every demanding task draws from that same pool. When you have a hearing loss, your brain works significantly harder just to process sound. It's filling in those gaps and trying to make sense of degraded inputs and predicting what words are coming based on context. Researchers call this listening effort, and the evidence is consistent that it increases substantially with hearing loss, even when the person feels like they're following along reasonably well. If hearing is consuming 70 cents of every mental dollar, then there's less left for everything else your brain is trying to manage, and one of those things is walking. Picture crossing a busy parking lot while your spouse says something behind you. A normal hearing brain uses the sound of cars, the footsteps, your own movement, ambient noise, and it all helps your brain stay oriented in space. When hearing is degraded, your brain has to work harder to process the sentence and then even harder to monitor the environment at the same time. That's when people start slowing down, hesitating, holding on to things without quite knowing why. A 2024 study in Scientific Reports looked specifically at this dual task dynamic in older adults with and without hearing loss. They found that hearing loss is a meaningful risk factor for falls and mobility problems, and that risk increases further as hearing loss becomes more severe. Both the cognitive load mechanism and the loss of spatial sound cues appear to be contributing there. And I'll be honest, I wish more people understood this before they had their first fall, not after it. What the research is describing here, I see it happening in real time. A spouse will mention almost as an aside, he used to walk ahead of me in the parking lot. Now he grabs my arm before we step off the curb. Or, she started being really cautious on stairs. I don't know what's changed. These observations aren't framed as hearing problems, they're just things that have shifted. But when we test and find a moderate high-frequency hearing loss that's been developing over 5 or 6 years, the observations about people's movement begin to make a lot more sense. Most people don't ignore hearing loss because they're careless, they ignore it because it comes on slowly enough that the brain keeps finding workarounds. You compensate, you adjust. You don't notice that you're doing that though. And by the time that compensation starts showing up physically, in your energy, your caution, or your walking pace, you've usually attributed that to something else entirely. Something that looks like aging is actually your brain carrying a heavier listening load every day. A meta-analysis in the clinical literature found that older adults with hearing loss have nearly 70% higher odds of falling compared to people with normal hearing. That's specifically about hearing, not a marginal number. The thing that concerns me most isn't just the slowing down itself, it's what people start quietly giving up because things feel harder. Their world starts to contract and nobody connects it to their ears. So what do you do with this information? Well, pay attention to 3 things. More fatigue after conversations or social situations than you'd expect, more hesitation in noisy environments like crowds and restaurants or busy stores, and more caution on stairs, uneven ground, or unfamiliar spaces. Any one of those on its own might be nothing. All 3 together, and a hearing deserves a serious look. If you've noticed those changes in yourself or someone you care about, don't write it off as getting older. Get a comprehensive hearing evaluation. Not a screening at the pharmacy kiosk, but a full audiological workup that includes testing for speech understanding and noise. The goal isn't just to find out whether you can hear tones in a quiet room. The goal is to understand how well your brain is functioning with sound in real-world conditions. That's a very different question, and most basic hearing tests just don't answer that. The danger of untreated hearing loss isn't only that you miss words, it's that your brain starts paying a tax on everything else in your life. Hearing loss isn't just a hearing problem. When your brain is working overtime to process degraded sound, that cost shows up in your concentration, your energy, your cognitive reserve, and how confidently you move through the world. Treating hearing loss won't make every mobility issue disappear, but it can remove one hidden burden that your brain may be carrying every single day. This walking speed finding from the Apple and University of Michigan study is striking on its own, but it fits cleanly into a body of evidence that's been building for years. Treating hearing loss protects your brain. It protects your physical function. It protects your independence. That's what the research shows. If this made you think, maybe my hearing is affecting more than I've realized, I've linked our free learning center in the description. It covers hearing loss, cognitive load, fall risk, speech and noise problems, and what comprehensive treatment should look like. And if you're here in northern Utah and want more than a basic hearing test, you can schedule a full evaluation in one of our clinics along the Wasatch Front. We test how well you hear in real life, not just whether you can hear beeps in a quiet room. Then drop a comment. Did you already connect hearing loss with balance, or is this the first time you've heard that connection? I read every comment. Thanks for watching.